together for some business and for a welcome break from their harsh life of the arid.
Hello, you're watching DD India and I'm Preeti presenting this special edition of Budget 2020 this Saturday morning. A very important morning today. The Finance Minister will be presenting the Union Budget 2020 in Parliament today, and also the main challenge before the Finance Minister will be to keep Treasury in balance, also to keep the fiscal deficit in limits, and added to that also to ensure how to achieve the ambition of the $5 trillion economy. Added to that, for common people like you and me, what does the budget have in store, and also what things will become cheaper and for what you will have to shell out more money. We'll have a discussion on this with two guests in the studio. Also, we will have expectations, lots more coming up in the next 1 hour. Stay with us. First, we get you more on the union budget and the expectations. The Union Budget for 2021 will be presented today. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will present the budget in Parliament for the upcoming financial year. This will be her second budget as Finance Minister. The budget is likely to draw the broad contours for Prime Minister's vision of making India a $5 trillion economy. Here's a brief look at the underlying logic of the economic survey.
The Economic Survey of 2019-20 has the theme of wealth creation. It acknowledges the economy has slowed down due to a fall in investments, the result of a 4-year lag from peak credit offtake of 2013. It projected a revival of economic growth to 6 to 6.5% in the next fiscal, beginning April 1. But suggested government should relax the budget deficit target to boost growth. The survey suggested the joining hands of market and trust as the principle of wealth creation.
Wealth is both a cause and an effect of investment, especially private investment. Therefore, it is important for us to focus on wealth creation. For close to 3/4 of recorded economic history, India has been the dominant economic power in the world. The economic survey posits that it is the combination of the invisible hand of the market supported by the hand of trust, which is what leads to wealth creation.
The survey suggests that India can take advantage of the trade war between the US and China, which is making adjustments in the global supply chain. India too can become an assembling hub. The Assemble in India for the World concept will create a large number of jobs, which feeds into the virtuous cycle of wealth creation.
If you take every iPhone, China, the value added that it creates on every iPhone is about $8.50, which dwarfs compared to the value added that a Japan or a United States actually creates in an iPhone. But the important effect that China actually has is the scale, which is that every iPhone, almost every iPhone, at least till recently, was assembled in China. So when you take a per unit, which is about $8.50, but multiply it with a large scale, you get exports that are significant, and in the process, significant jobs are created as well. The economic survey this year has actually done an estimation that if India were to actually follow a similar path, and I'll come to why this is the opportune moment, that India can create significant opportunities. Export of network products is expected to be about $7 trillion worldwide by 2025. Network products are those that are actually manufactured across global value chains. These include industries like telecom equipment, mobile phones, of course, photographic machinery, etc. There are 6 sectors which actually form part of these network products. By focusing on this particular sector, which, as I said, has a market of about $7 trillion worldwide by 2025, India can generate about a quarter of the value added that is required for it to achieve on the export side, the $5 trillion economy, and quite importantly, generate about 4 crore well-paid jobs by 2025 and 8 crore jobs by 2030.
The economic survey said that the banking sector is subscale for the size of the Indian economy. India, which is the fifth largest economy in the world, has only one bank in the top 100 of the world. There is plenty of room to scale up banking, and India should have at least 6 top 100 banks in the world when it achieves the target of a $5 trillion economy. One of the key issues with banking is wealth erosion due to willful defaulters. The economic survey suggests banks should create networks with analytics and artificial intelligence to help arrive at better decision making.
The Indian banking sector, despite the enormous size of our economy, we are currently the fifth largest economy, is subscale. What this chart shows is the number of banks that are there in the global top 100 country-wise. China leads the table. India comes quite far behind with one bank in the top 100. Even countries like Singapore and Sweden, which are a fraction of our size, they have triple the number of large banks. Now, if our banking sector were proportional to the size of the economy, India should have had 6 banks in the global top 100. And by the time we become a $5 trillion economy, we should have 8 banks in the top 100.
On the food inflation front, the survey suggests that the Essential Commodities Act has been ineffective in price stabilization and one needs to move beyond archaic mechanisms. The survey has introduced a new concept to indicate improved welfare of the common man, thalinomics, quantifying what a common person pays for a thali across India. It suggests affordability of vegetarian thalis improved 29% from 2006-07 to 2019-20, while that for non-vegetarian thalis improved by 18%. Budget Desk, DD India.
And Principal Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance, Sanjeev Sanyal, in an exclusive conversation with DD News, said that wealth creation is the central theme of the Economic Survey 2019-20. Let's take a look at the interaction.
First of all, sir, as far as this economic survey is concerned, what is the central theme of this economic survey?
The central theme of this economic survey is wealth creation. It builds on what we did last year, which was the theme of a $5 trillion economy, the idea of driving growth through boosting private investment. So we have revisited that theme. Particularly what we have done is made the case that if we want prosperity, if we want to pull people out of poverty, we need to focus on wealth creation, on entrepreneurship, on risk-taking, on startups.
But recently we have seen the economy slowing down. So what does the economic survey talk about as far as boosting this economy is concerned, sir?
You're absolutely right. There has indeed been a moderation of growth in the last few quarters. But first of all, let me clarify. I mean, much of the media debate seems to suggest that we are in some sort of crisis. This is totally not the case. Growth remains high by any standards, and we are still among the fastest growing economies in the world, even with this moderation. Many of the other macro stability indicators are very well behaved. There has been a small spike in inflation, but the underlying core remains quite well contained. The external accounts are in very good condition. Whether you look at foreign exchange reserves, we are at record highs. The current account deficit has narrowed very sharply. In fact, both in percentage GDP terms, but even in dollar terms. You look at the banking sector, the gross NPA levels have stabilized and they should now begin to come down. So overall, there is no macro crisis as people tend to be. Look at all the macro indicators. They are at the best they've ever been. However, we do need to take into account the fact that the growth has slowed down. And here we have talked about many issues in the economic survey, whether it is about monetary transmission, which is there in volume 2, and we extensively talk about it in the money and banking chapter. There is the whole issue which is there in volume 1, which is India's banking sector big enough? And we make the case that in fact it should be a order of magnitude larger than what it is. And then of course we talk extensively about ease of doing business, and there also we have done a lot of interesting new research.
All right. So, as you said that the central theme is wealth creation, but the recent spike in inflation number, does it concern you when you're going in the path of wealth creation? Is that a concern for the government?
So, of course, whenever we look at prices moving, we do look at it with some concern. But let me point out that this has happened due to seasonal spike in food prices. These shocks do happen from time to time, and it's a good idea to supply some localized supply side measures may be needed. But I think the key here to note is that the underlying inflation, the core inflation rate, remains very, very well behaved. And I don't think that it will really influence, inflationary expectations going forward, or indeed have a major impact on the Reserve Bank's monetary thinking. So I think inflation remains very well behaved, even in the case of vegetables and other items. Certain measures are being taken, but even here, the survey does talk about the fact that the old style thinking that of demonizing the supply chains and storage as hoarding may be something we need to revisit. So we do talk about that in terms of how we need to modernize our, the Essential Commodity Act type of thinking and modernize it into a new type of thinking. So that is also there in the economic survey. But as far as inflation is concerned, I don't think it is a major issue at all.
So, as far as the last year's economic survey is concerned, we were talking about $5 trillion economy. This time we're talking about wealth creation. Banking sector is considered to be the backbone of the economy. So what major reforms are expected going forward? Or what is the focus area as far as the banking reforms are concerned in order to achieve the target of wealth creation, the target of $5 trillion economy?
So one of the things we have done in the economic survey is to point out that India's banking sector is curiously small compared to its economic size. So country of our size should already have maybe 5 or 6 banks in the global top 100, but we have just one. Even small country like Singapore has 3 in the global top 100. So our banking system is simply underdeveloped. Now, while we argue that we need to grow it by an order of magnitude, it is to be also noticed that in the past we could not have done it because we had a banking system which was poorly regulated or supervised. There were all kind of problems with creditor rights, with willful defaulters and so on, all of which you know. So we have spent the last several years cleaning up the banking system. You've seen the imposition of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which has genuinely changed creditor rights. And I think there's been a genuine improvement in business culture in the country. So now I think the time has come where we can press the accelerator and begin to expand the banking system. The banking system is now ready for a very rapid expansion, and this is absolutely critical if we want to bring back private investment, create wealth, and as I said, go back to growth rates where we are on track for that $5 trillion target.
All right, because when we talk about wealth creation, we also see the ease of doing business ranking as well. Recently, we have seen a massive improvement in ranking as far as ease of doing business is concerned. So what does the economic survey talks about as far as the improvement as far as the ease of doing business rankings are concerned going forward as well?
So obviously we have gone through a big improvement in our ease of doing business rankings, which the World Bank does every year. Going from, I think, 142 in 2014, and 5 years later we are at 63. So that's clearly commendable. However, what we have done is to go and look at those categories where we have done particularly poorly and compared it to our peers, which are China, Indonesia, Brazil, and so on, and also compared it to the best in class, countries like Singapore, New Zealand, and so on. And so that we get a sense of how far behind we are on those parameters where we do badly, so that we can take a targeted approach to improve things.
So my last question to you would be that we're talking about $5 trillion economy by 2024. Just to conclude, what are the key components that we need to focus as of now in order to achieve that $5 trillion economy target, sir?
So there are obviously many of the things I just discussed. We do need to look at ease of doing business in a focused way. Spend time on mapping processes and regulatory environments. Only after you have gathered real-time information about what actually happens, not what should happen, but what actually happens, will we begin to be able to fix the process flows. So that's one. Secondly, we need to seriously think about our banking system being much, much larger than it is today.
So that was the interaction with Principal Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal. Up next, we'll talk more about the expectations with a guest in the studio. We're joined in by Mr. Himanshu Vats. He's senior journalist. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us this morning on DD India. When we talk of the budget expectation, we just saw the Principal Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance talk of how there is a moderation in growth, but then optimism is also high. Added to that, the macro indices are sound and promising. Do you agree with that? And when we talk of the budget today, the expectations are the crux word right in the morning today before the Finance Minister presents it. What do you expect from the budget?
See, first of all, the economic advisor, he made a very important point that, there's been some needless fear mongering about inflation and state of the economy. Inflation has been triggered by food inflation basically, and which happened because you had floods towards the end of the monsoon season and a little after that, and that upset the supply chain. Onion prices went up and a few things happened. Onion prices are already on their way down and expected to come down further. So, it's not a crisis situation that would require crisis measures in a budget. Inflation, it was seasonal and it will come down. Apart from that, the overall expectations remain. This government in the past 5 years, they've shown their determination to have fiscal discipline. There may be a few slippages here and there, so one would expect good projection of the fisc. Growth is going to be a theme. The economic survey has given indications. We are determined to become a 5 trillion economy. We want employment with growth. I would expect measures on that. And an overall investment, a little more roadmap, a little more detail on the roadmap to the massive infrastructure
we'll
spending.
talk more about this roadmap, but at present I'm joined in with our correspondent Ravi Dhiman, who's joining us from the newsroom. Ravi, when we talk of the important key areas which the Finance Minister is to focus today morning, what are those, and also the challenges which are up her sleeves this morning?
Well, Preeti, the Finance Minister has a tough tightrope walk today to do, because she has to maintain a very delicate balance between the government revenues and the capital expenditure of the government. As we have just noticed, there have been, experts have been saying that there could be fiscal slippages in maintaining the fiscal deficit. But the priority for the Finance Minister as of now is to prep up consumption, prep up spending by the common man. At the same time, she has to make a very delicate balance to not disturb the government revenues too much. Remember, she has given a huge stimulus by cutting the corporate taxes a few months back. That has also impacted the revenue front of the government. So she has to make a very tightrope walk. She has to keep the revenue intact for the government for spending on key social sector schemes. At the same time, she has to give enough encouragement to the common man to continue spending, which has seen a little bit downward spiral in the past few months. But I think the main news of today, as an encouragement for the Finance Minister and the policies the government has been pursuing on the economic front, is the endorsement by the IMF, which has said that there could be slippages, but the Indian economy is not in a recession mode. It has dropped down to 5.8%, but IMF projection for the next year, next fiscal, is 6.5%, on the lines of what we saw in the economic survey yesterday. So the things are looking promising, and as the economic survey said, that it's they have to break this cyclical thought now, and that could be one of the main focus points of Nirmala Sitharaman as she presents the budget proposals in Lok Sabha in few hours from now.
All right, Ravi, we are talking about fiscal deficit, and the crux of the economic survey presented yesterday was wealth creation. How is that to be taken forward? What are the key areas which present the scope to the Finance Minister to achieve this aim of wealth creation?
One of the main areas would be government spending, and we could see a shift from revenue expenditure to capital expenditure, which will lead to some making of some assets for the government. Remember, they had given a huge prop up to the infrastructure spending.
Right.
There was a national pipeline mission that was announced few days back, and in the economic survey yesterday, it has suggested $1.4 trillion investment in the infrastructure to realize the dream of $5 trillion economy. So she could be spearheading India towards a $5 trillion economy with increased focus on spending, government spending, especially on infrastructure, which acts as a, you can say, a stimulus for more investment into India, more job creation, and finally more spending by the common man.
All right, Ravi, we'll end this conversation here. We'll come back to you again during the day. As of now, thank you for joining us with your inputs. And as we told you, wealth creation is the central theme of the economic survey, which was announced yesterday. Chief Economic Advisor K.V. Subramanian said that India has been a dominant economy for 3 quarters of recorded economic history. He said that such dominance happens by design due to an emphasis on wealth.
We are joined by Vice Chairman to the Niti Aayog, which is principal policy-making body for the nation. And in the light of the new economic survey, we are going to know his perspective on the upcoming growth trajectory that India is going to have. So how do you see this economic survey, and with the kind of inflationary trend that we are seeing, and with the kind of ambitious growth target that you have, how both of these, go together?
The growth rate for fiscal year 2019-20 will end at about 5%. This is slightly higher than what the IMF has forecast, but I think the economic survey is right. In the second half of 2019-20, we should expect a higher growth rate than in the first half, and which will be about 5.2, 5.3%, so that we'll end the year with about 5% growth rate. For the fiscal year 2021, the survey forecast a growth rate of 6 to 6.5%. I am quite confident that this will be achieved.
Sir, the economic survey also talks about wealth creation as a primary focus area. Wealth creation has two aspects. One is wealth creator, who also needs some assurity from the government and a trust, and also the kind of wealth creation which should be very smooth and facilitated. So how do you see these two aspects in the coming days, and what government can do to enhance this confidence?
One, I'm very glad and very happy that the economic survey does talk about wealth creation as a principal concern of the government, because very clear, as the Prime Minister said in his 15th August speech, that without the private investor becoming much more active, without the private investor feeling more confident, we will not be able to achieve our growth targets. What the economic survey goes out to say is that we therefore need to further improve the ease of doing business. We need to give the private investor a predictability in our policies, and most importantly, we need to extend the hand of trust to the private sector. We need to support the private sector. There are many sectors in which the government intervention is more than what is required. So what the survey talks about is to reduce the regulatory cholesterol in the economy, and that, I think, is a very important fact for improving the investment climate. This improvement in the investment climate has also to come about at the state level, not just at the national, at the central level, because it is at the state level that the investor meets really the conditions. For example, the survey points out that even if they want to open a restaurant, they need 43 clearances, and that all has to change if we want the private sector to prosper and to add to our growth and to our GDP.
Okay.
So that was an exclusive interaction with Dr. Rajiv Kumar. He is the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, and we tried to gauge his perspective on the economic survey. Let's go back to our guests in the studio. We're joined in by Mr. Jayant Das. He is economic expert, and we also have with us in our studio Himanshu Vats. He is senior journalist. Mr. Vats, when we were talking of the groundwork which has been laid by the government, we were talking of the expectations. Now, fiscal deficit is one of the key areas, key concerns which the finance minister is expected to focus upon. Now, when we talk of the fiscal deficit, when the government took over the reins from the UPA government, the fiscal deficit was pegged at 4.1% in the last interim budget of the UPA government. How far has the country moved on from there? Because there was talk of how the numbers had been tampered with. How far has the country moved on from there? And the fiscal deficit, how crucial is it for the economy? And the what are the other key areas which the finance minister can focus upon to ensure that the treasury remains in balance?
Okay, as far as fiscal discipline is concerned, I think we've made massive strides from the economy the government had inherited in 2014. The fiscal slippage was pretty high that time. And plus, the banking sector was in a crisis, the outlook was pretty bad. So, you don't just compare with what it was at that time, you also compare it with what would have happened but for some very strong economic policies.
All right.
So, that's been pretty good. As far as the importance of the fiscal deficit goes, see, it is one very important parameter which the world looks at, whether you have foreign investors, people investing in bonds. This is one number that shows, how strong your economic discipline is. And, it leads to good health of other parameters. It has an impact on everything else in the economy, how much the government is borrowing, whether it is crowding out private investment. And it's a very important number which anybody who is investing will look at. It is important, but on the other hand, there's a lot of demand from many people in the corporate sector that you are, getting a kind of an obsession with fiscal deficit. Why don't you start spending a little more? That will, galvanize the economy, and that will give you more revenue, and that will, it will be a very virtuous cycle, and that will help you cover up the fiscal deficit. So that's a point to be debated. I think both sides are important. And one more point about, fiscal deficit, GDP growth and all that. There is a large chunk of Indian population which does not even know what a GDP is. You cannot fill their stomachs just by talking about macroeconomic indicators.
Right.
They are the people who are benefiting from other schemes, whether it is health insurance, or there's a PM Kisan scheme. There are roads reaching villages. So that's another process that's going on, independent of, I won't say independent of, but there are people who are more concerned for their day-to-day needs.
Day-to-day life.
They've got cooking gas, they've got other facilities. So I think that process is also continuing and should continue. And the fiscal discipline is another process which we urban people talk much more about. That also has to continue.
All right, we'll take that thought forward, but at present I'm joined in by our correspondents who are joining us from different parts of the country. We're joined in by Aisha Khanam, she's joining us from Hyderabad. And also joining us is Shama Mishra from the financial capital of the country, Mumbai. And we also have Duina joining us from Guwahati. Aisha, I'll come to you first. Let us know the budget morning today. What are the expectations of the people there in Bangalore?
Well, Preeti, people in Bangalore have very high expectations, just like people from across the country. And yesterday, since the chief economic advisor talked about Thali economics, and he explained how the Thalinomics have been laid out, and how a common man has benefited by this. So today, people across the country, and especially people in Bangalore, especially the IT sector, are expecting some sort of desert from the finance minister. They are expecting good incentives for the IT industry. They are expecting good reforms for the electronic industry. And also the fact that Bangalore is a startup capital. Bangalore has the entire infrastructure for startup here. So the industry is looking at better policy reforms, better hand-holding by the government for the startups, and also the boom of startups has led to the growth of other ecosystem, the other industry. Now the co-working space is the industry that has come up along with the startup industry. Now this co-working industry, which markets the space, which are considered as space providers for the startups, which create the incubators for the startups, are looking forward to better investments in the infrastructure, they are looking at better tax benefits. They are looking at the better policy to be laid out in terms of co-working industry. So these are the expectations that people have, since Bangalore is the industry which gives a push to the digital economy. In Bangalore, people expect that now that the government is looking at $5 trillion economy, so the people in Bangalore, especially the IT city, expect that this economy should be technology-driven economy. So they feel that the digital technology infrastructure should be given a boost. And also the fact that the government has given an indication in the economic survey about wealth creation. So people expect that this wealth creation can be in their hands if they are given better spending power. That means people are expecting tax rate cuts, and also they are expecting that housing rates and also taxes for the housing should be more affordable, so that
so tax rates and housing
will in turn give a boost to the reality sector.
All right, Aisha, from here we'll go across to our correspondent Shama Mishra, who's joining us from Mumbai. Shama, you're at the financial capital of the country, and when we talked with our correspondent joining us from Bangalore, Aisha, she told us that since it is the startup capital of the country, Bangalore, so people are focusing on different aspects, the tax cuts or the slab on the reality sector. You're there in Mumbai. Let us know, what are people looking for in the union budget today morning?
Well, yes, it's that day when, in Mumbai, along with the entire nation, the expectation meter is really high. We spoke to common people, to corporates, the housewife, to, salaried people. A range of expectations they are having, from the subsidies in LPG, cheaper LPG, safe traveling, better infrastructure, education should be better for the students. Let's shift our focus to the, tax sector. We have an expert with us. He's Ashok Shah. He is the senior partner in Asia Associate. Sir, the budget expectations have a round of, and a variety of expectations. What do you have to say about the expectations?
See, what has happened is that the finance minister, a few months ago, gave a soaps to the corporates. Now it's a turn of the common man. What has happened is that there is a weakness in the consumer demand. She needs to improve the sentiments and put money into the hands of the common man. This can be done by rationalizing the tax rates. Today, till 5 lakhs you don't pay any tax, and from 5 to 10 lakhs it is steep at 20%. Out of 5.6 crore people who file the tax return, 4.6 crores are up to 5 lakhs where they don't pay any tax, and further 1 crore are the one who pays 20% tax. I think what she needs to do is to put money into the hands of this sector by reducing the tax slab rate and put in more money. Second, she needs to boost the sentiments of the stock market. This can be done by eliminating dividend distribution tax and instead let the shareholder pay the tax directly. What it will do is that for the common person, their rate of tax is less than 20%. Again, it will boost the sentiments and help them out. So these are the two things which I expect the finance minister to do.
Also, you were expecting, something on the MSME sector?
Yes. What has happened is that the credit cycle of the MSME sector has been broken. And this has having a cascading effect. They are not doing well. This results in unemployment because they are not been able to employ more people. What is required is that their credit cycle be restored by having an alternative mechanism to give credit in their hands so that they can do their business.
Okay, so largely the expectation and the hope is, restoring the faith, and people should have more. And yes.
Even as we speak here, we have the carcade of the finance minister leaving her home, and in a while from now we will see her present the Union Budget 2020 in Parliament in Lok Sabha at 11 AM. And before that, we were talking to our correspondents. Aisha had joined us from Bangalore, Shama had joined us from Mumbai. And from here, we'll go across to our correspondent, Doina. She's joining us from Guwahati. Doina, our correspondent Shama told us that people in Mumbai are seeking better infrastructure and also tax cuts. Tell us, what are people there in Guwahati expecting?
Well, Priti, from the Union Budget 2020 to be presented today by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, people of Assam in particular and Northeast as a whole are expecting a lot. Like they are expecting, you can say, a New Year bonanza from the Modi government. You know, for in terms of development packages, and while talking to the chairman of the FINA, the Federation of Industry and Commerce for Northeast region, he said that this budget must focus on all-round growth, as you know, the economy has slowed down, to put it on the right track, and he suggested that you know, some steps must be taken for long and short terms instead of piecemeal measures to raise the GDP growth. And also the industrialists, or some of the industrialists opine that there should be some steps be taken for the startups, for the small scale businessmen and the medium scale businessmen. And the tax reforms are also looking for, you know, to improve growth and facilitate the Make in India campaign by drawing more entrepreneurs. And there must be, according to them, there must be some tax concession for the startups. And if you talk about the tourism sector, as you know, there is a lot of potential in this region. So they are expecting some special packages for the development of the infrastructure of the tourist spots of this region. And if you talk about the health sector, they are also expecting some affordable packages for the people, though Ayushman Bharat has benefited many of them, and the household and the middle class people, they are also expecting some benefit from this budget.
All right, Doina, thank you so much for joining us from Guwahati. So we had our correspondents joining us from Bangalore, from Mumbai and Guwahati, telling us what all the people are expecting there from the Union Budget today, which will be announced by Finance Minister in Lok Sabha at 11 a.m. Going back to our guests in the studio, we're joined in by Mr. Jayanta Das, he's economic expert, and Mr. Himanshu Vats, he is senior journalist. Mr. Jayanta Das, when we talk of the expectations, all the three reporters talked of how people are expecting more money in their hands. So the Finance Minister needs to put more money into the hands of the common man for investment ahead. But at the same time, there is a revenue shortfall. We saw that yesterday in the economic survey, though the chief economic advisor was optimistic and positive. At the same time, direct and indirect taxes are also a concern, and GST receipts are also not encouraging. It's not going to be a cakewalk for the Finance Minister today. What do you gauge of the challenges for the Finance Minister? On one hand, pumping in more money in the hands of the common man, and at the same time ensuring more revenue.
Well, obviously the balancing act is a tough one over here for the Finance Minister. But Preeti, there is also the other aspect. Post the corporate tax cut, there was a strong market rumor that some income tax cut would also be there, which didn't happen. And the other part was the slab from 0 to 5 lakhs, it's 5%, and then it jumps on to a considerable amount post that 5 to 10 lakh bracket. Disposable income would to some extent put in growth maybe in the economy, given the fact that consumer spending might increase more. But there is also a fact that specifically in weak economies at this point of time, which we are facing.
All right, here we have the North Block all geared up for the big action today, as we expect the Finance Minister to reach here anytime. A while back we just showed you the visual. She has left her home, and she's expected anytime, and we'll see her present the Union Budget 2020 today at 11 a.m. in the Parliament. Yes, sir, please continue talking of the challenges. So specifically in
weak economies, what we see is the consumer may not be overtly ready to go and spend the money, fearing that the situation may remain in this manner or may worsen further in the future. So I guess in addition to putting in more money in the hands of the consumer, I guess the broader picture remains of building out the economy to an extent that there is some confidence comes back, and the consumers not focus more on retaining those disposable income with him or her at this point of time rather than going on and spending it. The tax cut would only be beneficial if they go and spend that money.
All right. Yesterday, the economic survey was presented in the papers were there in the color of lavender, and that is the color of the 100 rupee note as well. And the economic survey focused on wealth creation. How do you evaluate the economic survey which was presented yesterday? First of all,
well,
and here we have the finance ministers Karkid enter the North Block, and here we have the lady on whom the entire nation's eyes are on today. The union budget will be presented by Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman today in the Parliament. And as we told you, we're joined in by the guests in the studio. We're talking about the challenges up the sleeves of the Finance Minister today, and also what are the prospects and what is the outlook for the economy ahead. Yes, sir, please continue.
Well, I guess there is a marked statement in terms of what the economy for the future, at least in the next 2 years, wants to imbibe, and it specifically speaks of wealth creation, which is a definite a move away from socialism sort of a mix, which even the chief economic advisor has said in his press conference. That's the first part. The second part, which I found of importance, is which maybe somewhere got lost in the footnotes, maybe not be there in the discussions, but that's the the dropout rates in education sector.
All right.
Which is red flagged out over there, which is an important factor, because if we are talking of India for the future, and if we are talking of a $5 trillion economy and things like that, our education system has to be equally robust. So I would like to see what the government today focuses on in terms of its education budget and specifically tackling dropouts. Apart from that, obviously the other major issues where it speaks of growth tapering down at this point of time, and it's only supposed to go forward from here at 6.5% levels. We also see a focus on how fiscal deficit balance would be, which I think Himanshu also spoke a while back, in terms of balancing the fiscal deficit and to what extent it can go forward. I per se am more a supporter of having a little bit of 30-40 basis points of excess fiscal deficit at this point of time to bring in back growth, rather than being much more conservative at the 3.3% levels and making the fiscal deficit remain there. It also speaks of inflation to some extent, but what I do believe is the overall focus has been a very candid story of what happened in the last few months in the economy, and I guess the economic survey has in no way shied away from issues which required a critical importance. And I think that sets the platform today in terms of what we need to expect from the budget. I think in one line, if I made to summarize the budget, the economic survey, it has been quite a candid document of the present state of affairs.
And here we have in the visuals Minister of State for Finance, Mr. Anurag Thakur, all presenting his prayers, and today we will see the crucial union budget being presented in Parliament. Our correspondent Arun is joining us. Arun, we saw your interaction with the principal economic advisor to the Ministry of Finance, and he seemed positive in the sense that he said that macro indices are there, but the overall outlook of the economy is promising. And when we talk of the $5 trillion economy target of the government, let's talk of the important key areas which would be in focus today.
That the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has reached North Block a short while back. She left her residence, and now she has reached North Block, and very soon, in a very short duration, we'll see the entire Finance Ministry's team, which was in this the budget making process, will be departing from the North Block as well. And we saw last time also when Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman broke the protocol of presenting the budget documents in a briefcase, and there was a red kind of a poti in which this budget documents were kept in this red cloth kind of poti. So that will again, we are expecting that same protocol will be adopted going forward by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman this time also. But important part, as you asked, Preeti, about the economic aspect of the budget. Now, primarily last time when we look at the economic point of the aspect, the focus was on making $5 trillion economy. That was the key highlight of the entire budget. The economic survey also highlighted the point that the focus is on making the economy a $5 trillion economy. But this time, as the economic survey says, and the central scheme of the economic survey is wealth creation. So going forward, I mean, that's a clear hint, that's a clear indication that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will be doling out some of the mega measures in order to create wealth going forward. We have seen that in last 1 year, the government has taken various initiatives so that people...
All right, here we have the soundbite coming in from Minister of State for Finance, Anurag Thakur. We'll get you that soundbite from in a while from now. As of now, we'll go back to our correspondent, Arun. Arun, please continue.
As I was saying, Preeti, that last time as the focus was $5 trillion economy, this time the focus is on wealth creation. In a short while from now, Preeti, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will be departing from North Block, and in next 2 hours we can say that the budget will be in front of us. That what exactly is the budget? But as I said, that wealth creation is a key focus. That means in last 1 year, if you look at the point, we have seen mega announcements have been made by the Finance Ministry, be it slashing of the corporate tax, be it the merger of the banks to make it too big to fail, so be it the banking sector, be it the corporate sector, or be it the real estate sector for that matter, mega announcements have been made by the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. But now what more lies in the hand of Nirmala Sitharaman, the Finance Minister? Because on one side you have to spend more in order to, when we talk about health and education, there's a need to spend more going forward. Right. But on the other side, is Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman having enough room to spend more? Because we know this fact that economy is gradually moderating globally, and Indian economy is also faced that brunt as far as the moderation of the economy is concerned. So what measures can be adopted by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in order to boost the economy, number one? So will the private investment also pick up? Because that's the major concern area. Because yesterday when I was having an interaction with the CII, the corporate organizer, the CII primarily, the DG of the CII, Dr. Banerjee clearly said that the focus should be on increasing the private investment. So that's the key focus area going forward.
All right, increasing private investment would be a key focus area. Thank you so much, Arun, for joining in. At present, we'll go across to our correspondent Meghna, who is at the New Delhi railway station. Meghna, the railways are a very crucial sector for the economy. When we talk of maintaining the fiscal numbers, the fiscal deficit, railways could prove to be crucial. You're there. Let us know more as to how promising could this sector prove to be for the Finance Minister today.
Absolutely, Preeti. As you said, it is very important to maintain the fiscal, and it's also very important in terms of railways, as we call it, the operational ratio. So the operational ratio, in fact, needs to be improved, which is one of the major things that the railways must be eyeing on, to improve the operational ratio to actually earn more profit. As we know that there is more profit in the freight sector rather than the passenger sector of the railways. So obviously, a dedicated freight corridor, which is being built, and it's very important to actually for the speed freight passage, and it's also very important as we know that the dedicated freight corridor, we know that the freight fares, we are expecting that the people are also expecting that the freight fares might not increase, but a dedicated freight corridor, there will be a budget allocation for that as well. Also, when we talk about the private the roping in the private sector, roping in the private players, as we know Tejas is a success, and it's also very important to see that how railways actually lures the private sector, and because the railways is trying to work more on the PPP mode, the public-private partnership mode. It's very important to see on that sector as well. It's also very important when the passengers are expecting, because from the last 2 to 3 years we have seen semi-high speed trains. We have also seen modern amenities coming into the railways. We have seen solar panels being installed at railway stations. So we have seen all that transformation. So obviously when there are transformations, the people's expectations also rise. So that is also one of the major things that people are eyeing on.
more facilities will be given, what kind of modern infrastructure. Also, it is very important to see, Preeti is here, that the last budget allocation had a good capex for the railways. So, and it was one of the highest, it was the highest allocation for the capex allocation for the railways. So this time around, people are expecting that there might be just some more capital expenditure on railways, which is also very important to boost some modern infrastructure, which is also very important to to bring in more private players to invest in the railway sector. So that is also very important from the investment point of view, and also important from the passengers point of view. And also to tell you, Preeti, when we know that there was an Indian-Brazil business forum a few weeks ago, a week ago almost. So that business forum, in that business forum, and also at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Railway Minister Piyush Goyal has insisted and has time and again stressed on the fact that railway wants to get electrified. So what kind of investment comes in, that will be also interesting to see. Also, it is very, very important that how much allocation in railways is made for the Make in India thing, because we know that Vande Bharat Express, the T18, the coaches are being made in India. So it's also very important how much investment will be there allocated for Made in India. So these are the few things which majorly the sector is eyeing on, and
yes, Meghna, even as we speak, we see Minister of State for Finance Anurag Thakur present at the Ministry of Finance in Norfolk. Thank you so much, Meghna, for joining us with those inputs from the railway station. From here we go across to our correspondent Philip Matthew, who's joining us from Chennai. Philip, Chennai is nicknamed as Detroit of India, and it houses more than 1/3 of the automobile industry of the country. Let us know what are the expectations coming in from there.
Well, you're right, Preeti. In fact, Chennai is one of the industrial hubs of the country. Apart from the auto sector, you have a whole lot of manufacturing industries which are located in Chennai. In fact, right now I'm standing on the Marina Beach, which is one of the iconic places as far as Chennai is concerned, and I'm here with a group of morning walkers who are actually just enjoying the morning sun, and we'd just like to find out from them what their expectations are from the budget. Tell me, what are your expectations from the budget?
As far as the economic survey was concerned yesterday, so we are expecting a 5% growth this fiscal year, and next fiscal year we are expecting 6 to 6.5%. So the major contributors to this are two problems as far as we see. One is economic, this employment, low employment rate, and one more is low consumption. So low consumption is, as far as low consumption is concerned, the government needs to reduce that personal taxes so that people will get more funds in their hands and consumption will be increased. And as far as the employment rate is reduced, low employment rate is concerned, so we need to create more and more employment. For that, more investments are required. So government has to make relaxations on foreign direct investments. So creating these relaxations will attract to problems also for the government. So we need to, there should be a balance between these two, and we need to see how the government makes a balance, so that it will be enjoyed.
What about you, sir? What are your expectations?
Our expectations are more, because we are going in a different phase. The flow of money is not in the market. People are affecting, everybody is affecting, from the small people to big peoples. People are not able to make a volume of the business, and they are not earn anything out of it. Even the salary peoples are also being affected. They are not getting whatever they were getting more salary previously, and the taxes are more on that. They want some relaxation on the taxes, because the indirect taxes will affected everybody. And the GST and all, every expenses what we have made, we are paying the taxes. Even though, again, if the income tax comes, then people have some problem in that. And the petroleum sector also, if it has come in a GST sector, everybody will be relaxed. And because the money once flow in the market, then on the volume of the trade, everything will be centralized. The thing is only.
What about you? What are your expectations?
Sir, actually, reduction in GDP is a welcoming concept, because Indians are not laborers. So Rahul Gandhi blabbers, number one. Number two, GST Council has to introduce several GST classification rates. Instead of just relying on only 4 classes, they are fitting everything in 4 classification. That is wrong on the part of this GST Council. Then GST should not be levied on poor men and students.
So my humble suggestion to our Honorable Finance Minister is to actually we should increase direct taxes rather than this indirect taxes. We should.
What about you? Any other suggestions you have for the Finance Minister?
So suggestions as for we need to think about the poor people, because the Prime Minister's dream is to make India a 5 trillion economy. So that so there needs to be increase in income of the people. So we need to see what government takes measure. And people are, some reports say ki after 1991 this is the most crucial budget as far as it is concerned. So it will be challenging for the government as well. So we need to see how they bring changes and how they make a balance between the fiscal deficit and the expectation of the people. That's all.
So as you can see, public here clearly understanding the dilemma faced by the Finance Minister, and they are hoping for some relief as far as the rising prices are concerned.
Right.
But at the same time, keeping in mind that the country is facing a tight financial situation, clearly there is some understanding of that as well among the public. So clearly a balanced budget is what people are looking forward to, at least here in Chennai.
All right, a balanced budget is what the people there in Chennai are expecting. Thank you so much, Philip, for joining us with those inputs. Going back to our guests in the studio, we're joined in by Mr. Jayant Das. He is economic expert, and we also have with us Mr. Himanshu Vats. He is a senior journalist. Mr. Vats, when we were talking of the economic survey yesterday, the other aspect apart from wealth creation was assemble in India, which was highlighted in the economic survey, and we've seen from Make in India, the new crux word is assembling in India, and we were given examples of the iPhone and how you know it was the rise was prominently seen. Now, what more could be done to protect and promote the domestic industry?
See, assemble in India, I would look at it as a subset of Make in India. It's not something in a different direction. So what happens in case of many international companies, before they actually set up a manufacturing plant, they would like to have a feel of the market, the local situation, and start assembling in India, which is a step towards making in India as opposed to making it outside and importing it into India. So that's an important thing. And all this is also a part of a much broader theme in the economic survey and in the general talk from the government, that it does want more private investment, whether it is foreign companies assembling or making in India, whether it is Indian companies getting in, this whole talk of wealth creation. There's also talk of, and this theme percolates in many parts of the economic survey.
All right.
For example, it talks about the Essential Commodities Act, and it has looked at data and shown that the basic achievement it has had today is it is harassing private trade, crowding out private investment, discouraging warehousing investment. So the economic survey and various statements from the government in many levels are pointing at more private investment, more wealth creation, and more public-private participation. So all this thing, I think it's a very positive trend. We've had a few years of cleaning up, whether it's the banking sector, whether it's the tax collection sector, whether it is disciplining the trade to be more tax compliant. So all this together, I think, has built a strong base and a framework for much more entrepreneurship, startups, and much more private sector investment, and that I think I'm very positive about.
All right. When we go across to our other guest, Mr. Das, when we see the key areas which need the finance minister's attention, is one of the sectors is the agriculture sector. The Prime Minister time and again has talked of how he aims to double the income of the farmers, and a number of initiatives have been taken in this regard. How do you see this sector rise and grow when we talk of the new Modi 2 government, which again aims at continuing with its target of doubling of the farmers' income?
Well, it's an important factor, Preeti, if let's not forget that the initial 4-5 years, a lot of Modi 1 put in a lot of growth trajectory from the agriculture sector. So I think that's an important part. There is no denying the fact that farm output has to some extent faced huge challenges. and I guess this particular budget would like to bring in some focus in terms of giving the money back. We are speaking of income tax reductions and things like that. We also need to speak on the fact that the rural demand has to be brought back. So that's a very critical part because it will also add on to how the farm output happens or growth from here. So overall, I guess there would be some focus. I mean, there's always been a focus on the agricultural part, but this time I look forward for some dedicated focus in terms of what the government does for bringing in some extra income into the hands of the farmer. Which can also be revisiting a lot of issues, which includes land and obviously irrigation measures and things like that, which on the infrastructure part the government is trying to address. But without the farm sector growing, I don't see any hope of economy rising from here. So I think that's clear with everyone. The government also is completely aware of it. So there is no shying away from the fact that the farm sector has to be given an equally important impetus when the budget prescription is read out for the year.
All right, before we move ahead, up next we'll take a look at this report on the budget and the new India investments and also what is at stake. And yes, as we told you, up next we'll get that report in a while from now, but we just saw a while back the finance minister has reached the North Block, and also the Minister of State for Finance Anurag Thakur has also reached the North Block, and the government there, the finance minister, they're all set to present the Union Budget 2020 in Parliament today morning. And as we told you, up next we'll get to this report on the budget and what's at stake, the investments and also the vision of the government's New India. Take a look.
With the corporate tax rates becoming competitive, the manufacturing sector has got a much needed boost. The tax rate for new companies is just 15% and the effective corporate tax rate for industry is 25.17%. This has given India the much needed edge to further boost its very good ease of doing business rankings. On the global stage, the Prime Minister has highlighted India's reform agenda and invited investments. There are $174.84 billion of FDI in the pipeline, with over 2 lakh expressions of business interest in the country from abroad. But why invest in India? Simply put, India has jumped 79 positions to the 63rd.
All right, so here we have the Union Finance Minister with again the Union Budget 2020. Along with her is Minister of State for Finance Anurag Thakur and the Finance Ministry officials. And here we again see a break from the earlier protocol of a black briefcase, which was seen all through the past years, but it was during the last time when we saw this this red cover used by the finance minister. And here we again have the union budget safely placed in the hands of the finance minister ahead of her announcing it in Parliament today. And we'll see her spell out what all she has for the nation today in Lok Sabha at 11 a.m. The finance minister headed with the Union Budget 2020. And here we see her leave the Finance Ministry office in North Block. All right, from here we'll go across to our guest. We are talking about the different aspects of the union budget that is expected to be announced today. Mr. Jayanta, when we are talking of the union budget, we just saw the finance minister with the union budget there in the red portly, as we would call it, and it is a break from the previous protocol of the black briefcase. So would you say that the change there would be evident in the announcement of the budget as well today? To be talking of the expectations, what is it that you're expecting from the finance minister today morning?
Well, I guess the bridging of the Bharat and India gap would always be an important focus for the finance minister. So, symbolic of the fact that last time also in a budget she used that red wrap.
She did not use the black
she used the red wrap in terms of bringing in bridging the gap, which I earlier said. Having also said that, it's not the best of the situations for the finance minister to juggle out, her numbers at this point of time. Given two facts, one is the present economic slowdown, and the second part, which is more important, is there's a global economic slowdown which we are also, facing at this point of time. Coronavirus is right there, at a doorstep in terms of what's happening in China. Although the chief economic advisor specifically has said that coronavirus may not be to that extent impinging on India's growth trajectory at this point of time. But I do feel a sense of opportunity over there because a lot of these Chinese manufacturing hubs either slowing down or shutting down. And things are going to get worse from here. I guess India can, seize a small window out of there in terms of having some of its operations back home attracting, and also the fact that international manufacturing hubs can once again be pitched for in terms of having them in a renewed interest being brought back to India, because for a nation of the size of China and for what they are facing at this point of time, it's not going to take just weeks, but it's going to take months to overcome this particular health challenge which they face and overall the globe faces. So having said all of that, I do believe that the finance minister at this point of time would start her speech focusing on consumer spending, which she did last time also, where her main focus, she said, was I want to bring growth back in terms of having the spending bring in. So obviously the first 15-20 minutes, 30 minutes of her speech would be focused on the government spending measures, but the common man would obviously like to focus on what comes up in the later part of the speech, and specifically the income tax measures, and hopefully some measures in the stock markets too, that would bring in the wealth creator part, because at the end of the day you can create wealth only if you have more disposable income in your hand.
All right, yes, the stock market is active today as well, in spite of it being a Saturday today, on the eve of the union budget that is to be announced, on the occasion of the union budget that is to be announced today. The stock markets will be functional, and when we're talking of the economic service yesterday, we saw the focus on the banking sector was also there, in the sense that it was said that that given the size of the economy, we have just one bank amongst the top 100 global banks. So a lot has to be done in the banking sector as well.
Well, we have always stomped on the fact that one of the top 5 economies in terms of size, and one of the fastest growing economies and things like that. What's important to understand is a robust banking sector is equally important backbone if you are speaking of a $5 trillion economy. We have over the past 2 or 3 years have seen a lot of mishaps both in the banking sector and how NPAs were being dealt with. We have seen some scams which have been unfolded and how they have been dealt at. What's important to understand is this government has also been focusing on bringing back banks with good books together to make it a much more robust, bigger size in terms of addressing issues, challenges and things like that. Banking sector, obviously economic survey has spoken quite well and quite broadly in terms of what it intends to foresee from the banking sector happening, and I guess it would do well both for the government as well as for RBI together to bring in a very robust banking system back into our overall structure. What I do believe is there is a strong expectation, since you're speaking of banking sector, about your deposit which right now is insured by the government till 1 lakh. That may be increased till 2 lakhs, so that at least some confidence is instilled in the common man who goes and saves his money in a bank or things like that. And specifically with what happened a few months ago in one of the cooperative banks in Maharashtra, which defaulted and had to shut down. So I guess that confidence boosting measure, whereby the government would like to bring in an amendment and try to increase your deposit insurance from 1 lakh to 2 lakhs. So that may be on the anvil, and that's being spoken of.
All right. We'll talk about this more with the other guest in the studio as well. But at present, we'll get to this soundbite. We'll get to this soundbite of the CIIDG, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, who says that the government needs to take bold reforms to create more jobs and better economic growth.
For bold reforms, and bold reforms होना ही चाहिए, and so we need to create more jobs, and therefore we need more growth, and more growth can come if हम अगर consumption demand जो है, investment demand जो है, उसको हम bolster कर सकें, और उसको bolster करने के लिए जो reforms का ज़रूरत है और जो impetus का ज़रूरत है, वो हम देखना चाहेंगे कि वो हम हमारी पॉलिसी लेवल्स में बजट में वो आ जाए. जो वर्स इन द इकोनॉमी जो था वो ओवर इज़ नाउ ओवर. अभी ग्रीन शूट्स दिखाई दे रहे हैं और इसीलिए मैं एक थोड़ा ऑप्टिमिस्ट हूँ कि ये जो फिगर्स हम जो बता रहे हैं that will be achievable.
All right, from here we're joined in by our guest. We're joined in by Mr. Rahul Gupta. He is former chairman of Export Promotion Council. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on DD India this morning. We're talking of the expectations and also what all important aspects are there which the finance minister needs to look in. As the former chairman of the Export Promotion Council, for you, what are the key areas which the finance minister needs to focus to boost exports?
I mean, last 1 year, the kind of political disalignment which has been there internationally, whether it is between US and Iran and US and China, this has led to great opportunities for exports, I believe. Vietnam as a country has used it to its fullest, and we also as a country have a great opportunity in it. So Iranian trade, India had been importing oil from Iran, and by virtue of the present state, our current account deficit can be hugely set off with Iranian imports of oil, and whereas their imports also they are in huge demand of various Indian products, so probably that can boost export. And the sanctions on China and the recent medical issues both will lead to great opportunity of exports from India. Indian products, by virtue of Prime Minister's efforts in last 6 years, has become a brand internationally. As of now, since before 6-7 years, we were exporting more like a merchandise exporter, more like a job worker to the world. But now Indian brand India and Indian products brand have been started getting recognized internationally. So there is a huge opportunity. I believe government is going to encash this brand alignment, which India as a brand has been aligned, Indian brands will get aligned, by virtue of which we'll have an international demand on a perennial basis instead of manufacturing for other brands. So this is going to really bring a huge impetus to the current economic situation getting solved and opportunity coming in. I believe Finance Minister is going to focus on this a lot, because whatever expenditure country has made, whatever effort has been made by branding country and products, is the right time to encash them.
How much of scope is there for the exports to provide to the finance minister when she intends to balance the treasury when we talk of the fiscal deficit?
So in case of exports, one of the primary issues which will be dealt in this budget is MEIS. So whatever merchandise used to get exported from India, government used to support it with a merchandise incentive scheme that has been raised as a blacklist kind of thing by World Bank, by WTO. Probably they will solve it and try to give new concepts, which was there in news media also, that government might increase drawback rates or might bring different kind of incentives. So this will really mobilize new investors to get into manufacturing. And also, since 1st October 2019, government has reduced the taxes for new manufacturing entities coming up. So probably the added impetus which comes in present budget and the last year 1st October scheme is really going to make things going and being visible in the form of more job creations and new products getting manufactured. Because the substitution which will take place will not only give boost to the present factories, but the products which we were never manufacturing, that opportunity is going to add up to a great extent.
Also, when we talk of the ease of doing business, a lot has been done by the government to facilitate that. And though India is there at the 79th position in the global rankings, but then how far have we come, and how do you evaluate, where do we actually stand in the sphere of ease of doing business?
As to the ease of doing business, yes, government has made a lot of things online, easily approachable, but at the same time, on ground implementation of that is really a struggle in present date. Probably government is going to further take it up, because manufacturing and promoting business is been in talks and is on a great agenda since economic slowdown issues have come up. But implementing it on ground would really be required. Discretionary powers on the ground level situation, I think government will be withdrawing at this stage now, so that actually businessmen can electronically get their processes and request processed by government instead of people intervening into it. I mean, in last 1 year, we've heard of income tax assessments being done with the faceless system, wherein you as a company do not know who is assessing your income tax returns. And I've heard that same thing will be implemented in customs this year. So what is going to happen if you have an import or export and you file your documents online? So somebody who doesn't even know which company you are will be processing it, seeing your documents, without having a personal interaction. Probably those things will really make a lot of difference in ease of doing business and we climbing in the ladder up further.
All right, from here we'll go across to our other guest in the studio, Mr. Jayant Das. When we talk of the different sectors, now we talked of agriculture, we talked of banking. Now the Prime Minister time and again has laid emphasis on how India is a young country, the contribution of the youth and how the caliber of the youth is to be utilized for India to grow on a global page. Now when we talk of the aspirations of the youth, employment generation is a prime concern. What options does the Finance Minister has at hand when we talk of employment generation, and how would that be dealt in the Union Budget this year?
Well, I guess specifically with the unemployment rate quite high, one of the decades low in terms of numbers. Number one. And number two, the economic survey for the first time has put in numbers in terms of job generation. So 8 crores till to 2050 and 4 crores in the initial phase. So I guess it's a very, very strict laying down of figures and quantitative targets. And I think that's to a great extent speaks of the government's intention of creating jobs. And that has been a challenge. I mean, obviously, you just can't keep on creating jobs in falling markets. So I guess the government spending to that extent, specifically in the infrastructure sector and the housing sector, what the government intends to do would bring back those jobs.
Also, when we talk of the concerns of the rural population, now the urban the urban population is concerned about the tax cuts and about education, health. But then, what do you make of the concerns of the rural population? We've seen the efforts which have been made in the agriculture sector. Let's talk more about it.
Yeah, typically, see, what I foresee is both the infrastructure requirement for the rural sector, and just not limited to the roads, but once again bringing the farm produce back to the markets in a convenient and a fast track manner. Because the story still remains the same, and that is the middleman which is taking most of the money. And we have seen how food grain prices have been fluctuated, specifically in critical commodities. And I guess that's an area where government has to go back, revisit storages and things like that, inventories. That's all part of a rural infrastructure. The farm infrastructure, I guess, needs to be focused on. And in addition to that, the non-farm output, which is also an important critical component when we speak of rural development, which we tend to forget. Whenever we speak of rural, we are only speaking of agricultural output. There is a considerable non-farm output out there in the rural economy which needs to be boosted and tapped. And I think that's another measure which the government can think of out of box in terms of bringing back the rural sector or the farm sector back
in the mainstream.
To the mainstream in terms of growth.
All right, and the rural budget of 2019 Union Budget had prioritized the issues of farmers' welfare, rural development and also water conservation. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had also formed a high-level committee of chief ministers to recommend measures to achieve the target of doubling the income of the farmers. State governments have a crucial role to play in agriculture, with agriculture, including agricultural education and research, being part of the state list. The upcoming budget is likely to see a similar priority for the farmers' welfare.
India ranks second worldwide in farm outputs as per the 2018 economic survey. Agriculture employed about 50% of the workforce and contributed 17 to 18% of the country's GDP. One of the clear missions that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has set for the government is the doubling of farmers' income by 2022. This assumes greater significance at a time when the economy is facing headwinds, which impact agriculture and lead to vicious cycles. Agriculture is also plagued with the vagaries of nature, which have become harsher with the onset of global warming. Agricultural GDP growth rate of 2.4% is not a drag in these difficult times, but it is a challenge for the central and state governments to increase it. The high-level committee of chief ministers had suggested more focus on food processing to develop the agricultural value chain and promote private investment. Penetration of technology, amending Essential Commodities Act, and bringing agricultural markets closer to farmers and producers were also suggestions. In 2019, the previous budget had earmarked 1.84 lakh crore rupees for food subsidy and 80,000 crore rupees for fertilizer subsidy. The targeting of subsidies instead of the current PDS system is a systemic issue. that when resolved has the potential to be a game changer for the agricultural economy. To boost food processing, what incentives can the food processing industry expect? Could these be enough to improve the value chains for traditional agriculture and horticulture? The Jal Jeevan mission to provide clean piped drinking water to every rural household by 2024 was announced in the previous budget. A total of 3.5 lakh crore rupees will be spent on this mission. This too has huge potential to re-energize rural households, and it would be interesting to see how the upcoming budget focuses on the Jal Jeevan mission. Government also initiated the Atal Bhujal Yojana to raise ground level water. This happened on the 25th of December 2019. 60,000 crore rupees will be spent under this scheme to benefit 8,350 villages from the states of Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Haryana,